Hi everyone, it's me, Sylvia. I'm here again with another author. Who do we have here today? Well, I'll tell you. We have Mary Huff Stevenson. And who is she? I'll give you a very short bio of her and I'll let her come on and introduce herself. She's right here, as you can see her. Who is she? Who is Mary Huff Stevenson? Well, I'll tell you. You have retired from your career, Mary, as an economics professor and have taken up a completely different profession, a different career.
That's
Please tell
right.
us, what was that different career?
I taught economics at UMass Boston for 40 years, which I often joke is better than 40 years in the desert. I'm a native New Yorker, spent most of my adult life in Massachusetts, but then after retirement, moved back to the New York area. When I retired from being an economics professor, I wanted to move around. I was kind of a couch potato, but in my middle age, I started exercising and working out. And so my encore career, now that I'm not teaching economics anymore, is I am a fitness instructor for older adults. And I teach NIA technique, I teach Zumba Gold, and I teach Ageless Grace. All three of these modes, you feel like you're dancing, not like you're working out, but it's a really great workout. And since I've been back in the New York area, I've been teaching online through a program for retired New York City school teachers. So I teach classes with them, and they are really fun to teach. And I teach in person. Recently, I started teaching in person at the JCC in Scarsdale. So I'm still teaching, only now I don't have to grade exams.
That's fantastic. And what book have you written? Can you show
Uh,
it?
this is this is the book that I wrote. It's called Our Words Were Our Bond. And it's basically it's built around a collection of letters that my mother and I wrote to each other when I went away to college, which was really the first time that we were ever separated. And so this was a very big deal to go away to college. And so these letters, she saved the ones that I sent to her. I saved the ones that she sent to me. I have the whole collection, and the book is built around 5 years of letter writing. And so the subtitle is A Mother-Daughter Relationship Preserved in Letters. And it really tells you a lot about the relationship that I had with my mother. That's really the focus of the book.
Excellent, excellent. All right, I'm going to throw a question at you, and in the middle, I hope you'll read an excerpt of your fantastic book, which I read and I really loved, by the way. I recommend it.
Thank
Fantastic,
you.
fantastic book. When you left home to go to college in Massachusetts, you'd hardly ever been outside of New York City and hardly ever away from your widowed mom, who raised you in a Brooklyn tenement. Yes, that's right, Brooklyn, and that's where I'm from too. Brooklyn tenement and a public housing project in Queens. Was it a big adjustment for you?
It certainly was. It was culture shock. Here I was, the kid from the projects, meeting all of my classmates, most of whom either lived in single family homes in the suburbs or in fancy apartment buildings in the center of cities like Manhattan. And so I felt like I really didn't fit in. Both of my parents had been high school dropouts. I was interacting with people whose parents were college educated. In one instance, one of my classmates, his father had won a Nobel Prize. And so it was very, very intimidating for me to be in this new environment. Um, but my two closest friends, I went to Brandeis, by the way. My two closest friends were Vicky and Pat. Both of them lived in nice apartment buildings in Manhattan, one on the east side, one on the west side. And they were my spirit guides to entering the middle class, because I really came from a working class background, and they taught me how to dress, what shoes to wear. They taught me how to eat an artichoke. They taught me lots of things that I just didn't know because, in some ways I was sophisticated. I mean, I could take the subway into Manhattan. I knew the museums. I'd gone to Broadway plays, but I didn't know anything outside of New York City. And I didn't know how other people really lived. And so, yes, Brandeis was a real culture shock for me, but it was a wonderful experience.
You look very sophisticated and you sound sophisticated.
Right.
I'm from Brooklyn myself. My dad actually grew up in the Bronx, then moved to Brooklyn. Um, I was living in Brooklyn many, many years until I got married and I moved to New Jersey, but I'm a real Brooklyn girl. Yes.
Yeah, me too. Can't take the Brooklyn out of the you can take the well, I'm sorry, it's the you can take the girl out of Brooklyn, but you can't take the Brooklyn out of the girl.
Girl, that's right.
I have a baseball cap. I was still living in Brooklyn when the Dodgers won the World Series in 1955. I still have a Brooklyn Dodgers baseball cap that
Oh,
I wear proudly.
awesome. Can you please read us a little excerpt from your book that maybe you picked out something you really liked?
Sure. The defining moment for my generation, I entered college in 1962, and the defining moment for my generation was the Kennedy assassination. And so let me read about how I learned that the president had been assassinated. Friday, November 22nd, 1963, was a beautiful day in Waltham, clear, bright, and unseasonably warm. In the early afternoon, Vicky, Pat, and I were walking from the Castle snack bar to the library, where we were planning to listen to our music appreciation assignment, usually played at that time in the lounge just to the right of the building's entrance. On the way, we saw our classmate, Michael, who always had a joke to tell. He was coming from the opposite direction. As he got closer, he yelled to us, "They shot the president!" We kept walking and chastised him for telling a joke that was in such poor taste. It was only when we got to the library lounge that we discovered he was not joking. Our music appreciation assignment was not playing. Instead, the radio was on and we listened to the reports coming out of Dallas. Like the rest of the nation, we were stunned. It was unfathomable, and on such a beautiful day. 38 years later, my daughter was a sophomore in college at NYU. Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, was a beautiful day in New York, clear and bright. And then, as had happened my sophomore year, the world changed. We were stunned. It was unfathomable, and on such a beautiful day. She and I have spoken about these parallel events and the ways in which they shaped our late teen perceptions of the world.
Terrible, very terrible, saddening. Yeah, my God. Oh, well, okay, making me teary-eyed. All right, these letters were written between 1962 and 1967. That's the year I was born, 67.
Ah,
What was it like to read them again, roughly 60 years after they were written? Were there any surprises?
there were. I'm now reading these letters from the point of view of someone who has had children of her own, now has adult children who have gone away to school.
Hmm.
And so I'm seeing these letters with different eyes. And probably the biggest surprise to me when I first go away, and as I said, we've never been separated. And it's just the two of us because I had an older sister who was very severely disabled, and my parents got to the point where they really couldn't take care of her anymore. She had to be institutionalized. My father died when I was 8. So I'm born into a four-person family. By the time I'm 8 years old, it's only my mother and me. And so when I go away to school, as I said, it's a very big deal. And um, my mother was absolutely committed that this was going to be a good thing for me. And so she did it, but at a cost to herself. And so those early letters, I'm writing to her and she's writing back that, well, now that she doesn't have to come home right away, she's staying in the city so she can avoid the rush hour. And she's taking a later train to come from her work in Manhattan to where we live in Queens. Maybe she'll go shopping for shoes. And she's writing all of these things. And when I was 17 years old, I took it at face value. Reading it later, I finally realized she dreaded going home to an empty house. And that's why she was delaying that as long as possible, getting home in time to get ready for bed and get up and go to work the next morning. But she couldn't bear the thought of coming home to an empty house. By my second semester, she figures out another strategy, which is she goes to night school. She hadn't graduated from high school. She had been taking a commercial course, and so she went to night school to brush up on her typing and stenography. And that's how she dealt with the empty nest problem. That was a very serious problem for her. The other thing that was surprising, though, I think of my mother and I as people who are generally supportive of other people, non-judgmental, usually have good things to say about other people. And what I discover about the both of us is that there's a little bit of mean girl in each of us. And so there are parts of it where we say fairly disparaging things about people. Not a lot, but it does happen. And often we're absolutely wrong. We're saying, oh, this marriage will never last. And people stayed married for over 50 years until the husband passed away. So a lot of people we got to apologize to. Well, not a lot, but some. Um,
Yeah, you're funny.
but the other thing, somebody asked me, somebody who had a troubled relationship with her mother, said to me, is it painful to go through these letters? And the answer was just the opposite. It was wonderful. I felt like I had brought my mother back. In those letters, I could hear her voice. I could hear her sense of humor. I could hear the playfulness that we had with each other. And so for me, it felt like I had brought her a little bit closer to me after she passed on.
I think it's beautiful. I'm very emotional because I was very close with my mom and I left, I got married, but we were still very close. But I know, she missed me and everything. So it was hard, when you are that close. It's just definitely
Mhm.
hard. And then I wish I had 5 minutes just to talk to my mom because she's passed a couple years ago. But we were very close and there's so many memories. And the fact that you guys had letters. Oh my, what a treasure. I wish I had that. That's
Yes.
fantastic. And to write a book
Yeah.
on that, that's even better. It's beautiful. It's
Thank you.
a beautiful thing. And empty nest syndrome. Yes, my kids are a little older now. They're in their 20s. My daughter has moved out. My son is still, meanwhile, still living with me, but it's hard. And I'm close
Yeah.
to my kids too. It's a very, very hard thing. You have to put yourself aside because that's what we do. We're mothers. But
Right.
it's rough. It's a rough thing. Yeah, definitely. But
Yeah.
your book meant a lot to me, and I think it'll mean a lot to a lot of people. It's very touching, and especially if you're close with your mom, and even if you weren't close with your mom, maybe now you will be after reading her book. I'm telling you, what a read. I mean, I'm getting very emotional. I feel it here, even talking about your book. I thank you for your book, really.
Thank you.
And I read what it was about. I said, I must read this book. I must get in touch with this author. And it's very nice meeting you. You seem very lovely.
Oh, thank you. You do too.
It's a pleasure. It's a
Yeah.
pleasure. Okay, so I think I have a couple more questions. Let's see. You've said you started out writing the book for your grandchildren, but then realized that it might have a much wider appeal. Why do you think people who don't know you might want to read this book?
Well, there are lots of ways to read this book. It started that I just thought, gee, I have these letters. They were written at a time when Brandeis was a young university. Maybe I should just give them to Brandeis for their archives of the early years. Maybe at some point somebody will want to come and study them. And I was saying this to a friend, and she said, well, who would be a better interpreter of these letters than you? And so I did. I also, a motivation was to leave it for my grandchildren. I'm getting on, and my grandchildren are little, and I want them to have a sense of who their grandma is, and also their great. They never met their great grandma. I would like them to have a sense of who she was. But so you can read it as a kind of documentation of an artifact of communication that we don't have anymore. People don't write letters anymore. And, if we send emails or send texts, we don't really save them. And so this was a major means of communication. And at that time, long distance calls were expensive. So you didn't even use the phone that much. This was an important way of communicating. And it's as a historical artifact, it's kind of interesting. It's also, given the time frame, the early 60s, it can be read as a story of America's glory days. It can be read as a kind of optimistic period when we were still living the American dream, where somebody like me could have upward mobility. And so it could be read as that kind of, success story of immigrant grandparents and the granddaughter's a college professor. It could also be read as a story of the limitations of the American dream, because built into the letters is a reflection of the times, including the racism, the sexism, the the downside of that dream. So this was a time period where women still, it was very rare for women to become doctors or lawyers. I mean, if you went to college and you wanted to work, you were a teacher, you were a nurse, you were a social worker, all wonderful, valuable occupations. But if you wanted to do something else, you would face some barriers. And I talk about what happens to me when I'm in graduate school. And here I am, I want to study economics. I'm very serious about it. I become an economics professor. And what do I get? What's an attractive girl like you doing in economics? Believe it or not. And and I found that in the letters.
Wow.
So
Wow.
it can be read as, as from that aspect. Um, we can focus on the mother-daughter relationship because we both evolve, and we both, we start out a little bit timid because this is new for both of us. And over the course of our writing, we both kind of find our stride. And that is another way you can read the book. You can read it as what makes a person resilient. All right. Because, I come from this sad loss in early childhood. And because of my mother's love, because of the support of this huge extended family I had, I'm able to thrive. My mother goes to work. She doesn't even have a high school degree, but she's a smart lady. And her work becomes appreciated, and she moves up in her organization because she is smart and she understands how to interact with people. And so we both, in our own way, find our path. And it really is a story of the resilience, not just of me, but of her resilience as well. So I think there are lots of places where there are things that would resonate with a very wide group of people.
I have a two-part question. Um, What kind of feedback have you gotten from people, both those who you know and those you don't? And is there another book in the works? Tell me, please. Yes.
Okay. Well, um, people I know. I did send drafts to people while I was writing the book so that I could get, I could get some additional information about some of the things I was writing about. So, for example, I have a cousin who was like 15 or 16 years old when she came up to visit me. And I write about to my mother about how I'm going to go on a date and I'm going to get a date for Denise. And so I sent Denise a draft. I said, Denise, do you remember this? And she said, of course I remember it. She said, I was 16 years old and you were fixing me up with a college man. So it was this dazzling experience for her. And so there was a lot of nice feedback from family and long-term friends who recognized the cast of characters. I also got feedback from more recent friends, people who didn't know much about my previous life, people who had never met my mother. And what I get from them is, I've fallen in love with your mother. Or, her mother had a great sense of humor. And so her personality comes through in those letters. Um, and often what people will respond to, people who don't know me, is the fact that the letters give an authenticity to the whole story. I don't have to describe my mother because she comes through in the letters. Um, Often they say to writers, show, don't tell. Well, I don't have to tell, I can show. And so that's, I think, one of the things that people really respond to is we have the raw data, right? My mother's voice comes through. Is there another book? Well, during my career as an economist, I wrote a bunch of books. And so I have done a lot of professional writing. This was the only book I've written that wasn't, a professional book about economics in one way or another. I don't think there's another book in me, but I did, after I wrote this, I started thinking, gee, I actually like writing. And so I took a course in writing short stories and decided it was useful. I enjoyed it. And I decided I don't want to make things up. So I took another course in writing personal essays. And I learned a lot. And I have been writing some personal essays. And I don't know if they'll ever show up anywhere. But I find that I actually do enjoy writing. And those personal essays are ways for me to think things through and connect things. And as I said, I haven't thought about submitting them anywhere. I did this description of the Kennedy assassination. I did send a version of that to Brandeis, and they published it in a newsletter. But other than that, I haven't really tried to submit anything, but I am writing.
Good to know. Okay, so we're going to be closing the show in a minute. Where can we reach you? Where can we purchase your book?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's free on Kindle Unlimited. There's an e-version, which I think is $7.99, and there's a print version, the paperback version. And, I thought about the range of where I should be pricing it, and I decided $17.99. And then only after the fact, I realized I'm charging high. But it was like, instinctually, I went to $17.99. And only after that did I realize that it was high. Now, in terms of contacting me, I don't have a website, but because I was an academic, I'm all over the internet. But the way you have to look me up, because there are lots of Mary Stevensons. you're going to get a lot of things that are not me. So the way you look me up is by my full name, Mary Huff Stevenson. And I guess one other thing I would mention, how did a nice Jewish girl from Brooklyn get a name like Mary Huff Stevenson? Well, my grandparents were immigrants. The immigration official could not pronounce my grandmother's complicated Russian name, so he said, your name is Mary. My paternal grandfather decided when he went to be naturalized that he would change his name to a real American name. And so Yudel Hofsowitz became Julius Huff.
Wow.
And then I married a Gentile whose name was Stevenson.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on your show. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh,
And
thank
I,
you for having me. This was delightful.
it was delightful. Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone. What a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.